Good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody here. Today we have a very interesting theatre personality, Sachit Puranik, and I'm very fortunate to have worked with him on several plays. And he's been extremely shy and reticent, and he has just recently sent me his write-up, which I need to read out to you. Sachit, you can, yeah,
Now that you're calling me shy and reticent, I must appear and
there
and
he
and,
is, and
and
there's the
explain
man.
why I need to be shy and reticent.
No, but that's your personality, Sachu. So, okay, so he is a multilingual writer, theater maker, filmmaker, and he wears many hats. He's a playwright, a director, an editor from the Film Institute, which you forgot to mention that, Sachit. This is what I mean about self-promoting. Learn, boy. He's a casting director, a producer, and a performer, and he's done some fantastic work in some amazing films like Court, Ship of Theseus, Garbage, among others. You can catch most of these on some web platforms. And his theater work includes this very interesting piece, one-man show that he does. I've seen it twice, and if ever you get a chance, you must see it. It's called Karl Marx in Kalba Devi. It's an imagination of if Karl Marx came today to India, what would his reaction to everything be? So, and each show is new because he does a whole bunch of improvisations and it's great fun. And the other plays he's been in, our wedding album, along with me, and we travel the world with it all over in London, Pakistan, US, all over the place we've been. And another very interesting play he was in was called Mere Piya Gaye Rangoon, which was performed at the Globe Theatre, the Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. So that was really something amazing. And apart from that, he's done some fantastic international work all over the world in countries like the Netherlands, Western Europe, France, Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, etc., etc. And today he has some very interesting pieces lined up for us, which are called Letters in Red. And I think I'll just hand over and let him take charge now. Sachu, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Dipi, and very very good morning to such a bright, chirpy, chatty bunch of people. I couldn't have asked for a better start to Thursday, and I'm really very excited to share something of a piece of a genre which is called documentary theater, and it's essentially coming from the theater of non-fiction, where there is a certain kind of theater where a playwright sits in a room and imagines characters, writes them, a director casts actors, and and there is craft and there is technique, there is a costume design, there is a set, things come into place, people go and watch. That is a kind of theater, of course, but my stint in Europe kind of opened my eyes to something called documentary theater, where actually non-professional actors are claiming and communicating their own story. So it need not be necessary that the person on stage is an actor or a professional actor, but could be an activist, could be a journalist, could be a teacher, could be a homemaker, but still that story counts, and that story is usually written with the director and the performer in mind. And so this small piece called Two Letters in Red happened as part of we had a community art space in Warsaw called Harkat Studios, and we were curating something called an evening of melancholia, which is that we wanted that a bunch of 60-80 people come to a room and cry. We thought there is some kind of healing therapeutic value to it, and this piece was curated for that evening of melancholia, and it had a very German kind of an aesthetic where people were not allowed to clap, but they had to just witness one piece after the other. So now, what are these two letters in red? So one is a factual letter and one is a fictional letter. So I usually on stage, I would read it with some musical instruments, and there is a lot of context and there is light and design and all of that. But the interesting part is that the letter works on its own. The first letter, the factual letter, because that it was written in 1986. It's available all over Wikipedia, Google, You can just look up for it. And it's a very, very compelling letter. So I'll start with the factual letter first, which is written by Comrade Baldev Singh Mann on the eve of his daughter's first daughter's birth, so to speak. And it was on the night of September 25th, 1986, that Baldev Singh Mann, a communist activist fighting the extremists in Punjab, was killed while he was on his way to his village, Cheena Bagga, in Amritsar district, to meet his 1-week-old daughter. Now, this is something I got from the internet. And then one of the crazy things about living in a city like Bombay is that I get to know that his daughter is an actress in Warsaw, and she does Punjabi films, and she's doing a lot of advertisements and music videos in Hindi, and even though she has no direct connection with the lineage of her father, the father was a radical communist, so to speak, and ended up getting martyred by the Khalistani fundamentalists. But this kind of connection that this daughter is here, so we got his daughter Sonia Mann onto stage, and all we did is that we just wanted the letter to be heard by her. We just wanted her to respond to the letter. First, actually, we tried the idea of her reading the letter out, but it would have been a slightly insensitive thing to do, because she had her own kind of for her only association with her father was this letter which reached after the father's body reached home, so to speak. So without further ado, I'll just get into the letter that he wrote on the day she was born. And of course, it is in Punjabi, but I'm using an English translation. And I'll go through it fast because there is a very little time, and I want to do a lot of and I really want a more candid chat with everyone here. So I'll go straight into the letter. Welcome to the world, my darling daughter. I got the news of your birth from your Dadi on the 18th of September, 1986. While intimating to me the news of your birth, your grandmother did not express the joy she undoubtedly would have shown had a son been born in your place. Because you are a girl, your birth did not bring joy to our home. So, the goodie has arrived, said your aunts, in a sad tone, as if nature had given me an unfair deal. Your uncles did not even speak to me today. Perhaps they think it's best to say nothing in these circumstances. I am sure that my friends and comrades who share or empathize with my ideology will congratulate me and demand a party in celebration of your arrival. Your Dadi is surprised by the congratulatory messages she has received from your mother's natal family. Whoever sends congratulatory messages on the birth of a girl is how she sees the situation. Your Dadi is saddened by the fact that I stand diminished with your arrival. A son, on the other hand, would have added to my status. My darling, I'm not the least surprised by the reactions, for I am aware that in the present social system, a girl is considered a burden, a source of indebtedness. Mind you, this was 1986, but I would say in 2020, not much has changed. I had heard and read a lot on the subject. Today, I'm having to live through the same experience. Perhaps your Dadi is even more saddened because in her view, I'm unemployed and useless. So at least you should have been born to someone with a proper source of livelihood. That is how society has been for centuries. The enslavement of women is an integral part of the feudal capitalist system. Dear daughter, your father is neither a good-for-nothing nor worthless. He's busy in the struggle to change the present social setup where the birth of a girl like you is greeted not with joy, but sorrow. There is no doubt that even many progressive-minded people who are regarded as path breakers and leaders have in their practical life behaved in much the same fashion as is to be expected from hardcore reactionaries. But I have resolved to live my life in a fashion where there is no dichotomy between word and deed. My lovely one, it'll perhaps be a long time, only after you've grown up, that you appreciate the ideal of my life and the struggle that I'm engaged in. I'm struggling for the birth of a social order in which the shackles that enslave human beings are broken to bits, where the oppressed can heave a sigh of relief. The struggle is on for the emancipation of starving children, of women who are forced to sell their bodies in order to feed their bellies, of workers who trade their blood for bread, of peasants groaning under the crushing burden of debts. And in this battle for a new world, your father too is playing his humble part. In the times in which you have been born, Punjab stands divided along communal lines. In some places, people are being killed because they do not grow their hair long enough, while in other cases, people are being burnt alive for precisely the opposite reason. Humanity is being butchered in the name of religion, having created divisions among people, having initiated a holy that's being played with blood. The devil is having a good laugh from a distance. My baby. In the moment of your birth, your father is engaged in a battle against the forces of darkness. Such forces are conniving to banish every sun that could bring light into this world. My darling young one, it is absolutely essential to struggle against such an evil conspiracy, even at the risk of one's own life. I cannot be certain that in this search for light, I too will be done away with. Whatever may happen to me, my little one, you will forever be proud to be born to a father who battled against the evil storm. Perhaps I will be unable to provide you with the comforts or fulfill the responsibilities that are expected of a father. But the legacy of principles I will leave behind will be precious. You are the flame of a candle that is destined to spread light. Beware. Do not ever get misled by the devils that conspire to torch homes of the poor in the name of humanity. Even if we are unable to win in a battle, my darling, try you must. Try you must to be at the head of a caravan engaged in the battle for truth. It is far from my dream that you grow up to be a Sikh, a Hindu, or a Muslim. Try you must to rise above such identities and be a human being. Beware, lest the humanity in you is diminished because of such divisions. My darling daughter, these few words are my messages to you in this moment of your birth. I hope you will accept them and try to act according to them. These few words are the foundation of your life to build your dreams upon. Your father, Comrade Baldev Singh Maan. And somehow, as you can imagine, if I told you that this letter was written by a playwright or a writer, then the gravity of it would be somewhere lost. When you know that it is an actual letter which managed to reach the family only after the body of the man who wrote the letter reached. But you can completely think of how tense and tender this moment on stage can get. In fact, I was trying very hard to get Sonia Maan, the daughter, to join us on Zoom for this, at least to hear the letter. But she told me that I'm really happy that you are taking this letter and reading it out wherever you get a chance, in public, now online. But I really want my kind of closure with it, so to speak, and at some level she's also she just wants to act. She doesn't want to respond to the greatness that has been bestowed onto her by her father's work. And that's also very interesting, that the political parties in Punjab today are still wanting her to join politics actively and not be a film actor. But I'm very proud that, as the father's letter ended, that you build your dreams on your foundations, that she's pursuing her dreams. And this first letter was actually ending with a bit of a small performance of a song, which with your due permission, and since Dipi and me have a long history of singing, I just like to hum something that it was written in kind of Punjabi, but Indianized Hindi Punjabi, so to speak. है तेरे नाल मेरी वफा, है तेरे नाल मेरी वफा, मैं नहीं ताकी जिंदा रहेगा प्यार मेरा, मैं नहीं ताकी, मैं नहीं ताकी, मैं नहीं ताकी, मेरे लिए ना हंजू बहा, मेरे लिए ना अश्क बहा, मैं नहीं ताकी, है तेरे नाल मेरी वफा. That being the factual letter. Thank you so much. And it's always one thing I like. I've done this letter with different kinds of people, and I make it a rule always that whenever I do this letter with a live audience, I'm specially looking out for the women in the audience and seeing what their reactions are, because patriarchy as a system, it works in spite of your privileges, in spite of the privileges that you might have of caste, of class, of social mobility, of anything. But patriarchy as a system is so subtle, and it is so ingrained into the feudal capitalist system of our societies, that that story at some level becomes everybody's story. And I'm really very very lucky to be reading that letter out for everyone here. And now coming to the fictional letter. So this fictional letter was done as a contrast to the factual letter. So this was more of a performance that I had done, which is Karl Marx's ghost coming on the deathbed of his favorite daughter, Eleanor. And you can read up a lot on Eleanor Marx. She was the only one who lived the longest in the family, so to speak, and got the most amount of acclaim. And very tragically, she's said to have committed suicide, and she was assisted in her suicide by her husband. So Karl Marx, with all his theories of wanting to change the world, as a vulnerable father, writing to his daughter, and the strength that she imbibed, and at the same time, love being such a universal thing that actually ended up being her undoing. So I'll read out the fictional letter. My dearest Eleanor, I have come back 150 years after my death to address the romantic cruelty that killed my favorite child. You, the apple of my eye, whose intellect was as dazzling as a beauty, but then history wrote for you an unfortunate end. Well, a less unfortunate end than mine, because only 11 people turned up in my funeral, while there were hundreds at yours. But your fame was as natural and, dare I say, destined as your birth and death. A child so bright that at the age of 8, you were writing to your uncle Friedrich Engels about supporting Poland in the Russia-Poland crisis. You, my Eleanor, were a trailblazing feminist, a lover of literature, not to mention a trilingual prodigy, since I ensured we grew up in different countries, some of the perks of having a political refugee for a father. But most of all, you were a tireless activist for the poor and oppressed all over the world. Your life was extraordinary, yet its failures and heartbreaks all too ordinary. You, my love, believed in the best, yet suffered the worst. I've written this letter and I'm reading it only to drive home a point, to realize how misguided it would be for anyone to view you merely as the daughter of someone. Friedrich Engels, whom you thought as your second father, not very flattering for me, I must confess, and me, your papa, Karl Marx, may have shaped your brain. We may have shaped your brain, but your spirit was all your own. Ironically, I must confess, I had wanted another son, but I had poured all my energies and expectations into you, my love, the priceless baby daughter, valuing your intellect and expanding your imagination with my stories and games. For all my faults, say it just once. Just say it once that I didn't do too badly as a father. True, I made a dog's body secretary of you, my home educated daughter, but I also inspired you and stretched your mind. I can't ask you to be proud of what you inherited of my struggles, but I will take complete credit for putting you inside a room which had more space for debates than a humble cradle and some second-hand toys. You inhaled socialism with the smoke from my endless cigars. First, you just mock smoked them until your passive smoking turned you into an active mind. That odd household, rather unconventional, because many know that I secretly fathered a son with our housekeeper. Lacked food, clothes, and comfort, but it was always well supplied with books, paper, pen, and ink. And most importantly, conversation. What you most desired was to change the world. My love, you threw yourself, body and soul, into the fight for equality and believed that no just society could emerge from the horrors of industrialization unless men and women fought shoulder to shoulder with equal rights. On May Day 1889 in Hyde Park, you, my love, an indomitable young woman, 34 at the time, addressed a crowd of men of more than 100,000 people in support of the dock strike and told them, socialists believe that the 8-hour day is the first and most immediate step to be taken, and we aim at a time where there will no longer be one class supporting two others, but the unemployed both at the top and at the bottom of society will be gotten rid of. It wasn't to be. It wasn't to be, but never mind. With infectious energy, you, my love, rushed from demos to meetings to fact-finding tours to committees in smoke-filled rooms for this swirling activism of yours. Sometimes you lived on air and nicotine. You always put yourself last. It's telling that your motto from childhood was go ahead, and it is impossible not to admire your conviction and sincere humanity. Yet you, my love, the dazzling star of Eleanor Marx, were to be extinguished by love. From what I read and learned later in my afterlife, that your friends, among them George Bernard Shaw and the magnificent South African writer Olive Schreiner, they could not understand why you, who had been quoted by leftist intellectuals and were so universally admired by their intellectual set, should fall hopelessly and pathetically in love with a wastrel and lying poser called Edward Aveling. They all loathed him. He was a good actor whose silver tongue easily charmed women and leftist organizations alike. His compulsive philandering suggests a sexuality absent from his photographs. Your story, my love, is dissected through with the melodrama of the great Victorian novels. A tale of secrets, infidelities, lost letters, and legacies, depression, deception, and the ultimate tragedy. Just as the left seems always doomed to infighting and factionalism, to the point of bitter hatred, and just as sincere socialists like you were fated to be disappointed by the brutal truth that the mass of workers do not want. They do not want what we want for them, or they do not want what we want them to want. So the great heart of Eleanor Marx, my love, was destined to be broken by a cad. Reading about your unsufferable forgiveness, I now want to time travel and gently slap my brilliant daughter and tenderly pull her pigtail for her blind stupidity in loving a man who did not deserve your love. Edward Aveling, the fraud of a man. In 1898, after living with you for 14 years, exploiting you, humiliating you, and bleeding you dry, Aveling married his actress mistress behind your back. When you, my love, found out about this, you took prussic acid, lay on your bed in your best white summer dress, and died a horrible death. To this day, Aveling is suspected of helping your death, in quotes, helping your death, and destroying letters in order to secure your assets. How tragic that the warm-hearted intellectual who wished to liberate all women was incapable of liberating herself. Since death and life, and precisely in that order, have failed in comforting our wounds, I shall finally succumb to what you love most: music. Winter time, and the living is not easy. Fish are dying, and the cotton not dry. Your daddy is poor, and your mama plain looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. Your father, Karl Marx. Thank you, thank you, thank you. How are we doing in terms of time, Deepika?
Yeah, we have half an hour, Sachu.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Just leave about 10 minutes in the end in case anybody has any questions or like
Sure.
an interactive chat.
Sure. Right now, actually, yeah. I mean, like the so-called pieces are done now. But before I get into the Gandhi bit and all, I thought generally if you want talk about this right now or take any responses, because it would be interesting to just see how it works. If people have any, because usually what happens on stage is that, we may not immediately talk, but you can feel the awkwardness in the people and the gulp in their throat. So it would be if anybody, or maybe you want to talk or something, I don't know.
Yeah, why not? Ladies, if you have anything to say, I mean, you could unmute yourself and ask him any questions if you want to. I personally wanted to observe that it is so tragic that a person like Karl Marx, who stood for everything, his own daughter could not liberate herself from all this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And and actually he was like, from the 7 children that they had, they lost 3. So at a very young age, and it's kind of uncanny kind of a coincidence that only the women in that house survived. The sons died, and it was so it was basically like Marx working at home with the wife, the nanny, and the 3 girls. So and out of which Eleanor was the last one to come, and which is why she was, and they were very worried that they had lost so many children before that to poverty, that nothing should happen to her. And she was in that sense one of the most successful people in their family, but even she ended up with a very, very tragic suicide.
Yeah.
But it shows the loneliness of that woman, and nobody in this big family could help her or could sense it. This is what I find is so tragic.
Absolutely. It's like sometimes a lot of great people, or what the society calls them as great, they're that kind of how their children have to pay a price for their so-called greatness is very evident from what Harilal would go through in the Gandhian household. Or the kind of, like, because as a young girl, Eleanor is writing letters to the American president on what steps should he be taking in the civil war, and what should he not be doing, and for a girl aged 10 years old, 11 years old, writing these letters, and they were getting replies which were not by the original president. Of course, replies were written by Marx and Engels himself. So it's kind of this make-believe utopian, that we will, so it puts so much pressure on a young person. Somebody else was saying something.
I had a question. You mentioned in the letter that he had a son by the housekeeper. Did he accept the son publicly, or it was a hush-hush thing which was spoken of in whispers?
Yeah, actually, he's never acknowledged it publicly. In fact, the son took the legal name of Frederick Engels. So Frederick adopted that son. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and actually when the Russian Revolution had its first big victory in 1918, the only person alive from the family was the illegitimate child of Marx, because Eleanor had also died before that. So the only person to see the red flag being unfurled up was somebody who could not claim it.
Who could not take his
Yeah,
name.
yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
One more
Wow,
question.
that's
You know,
ironic. Yeah.
Very ironic.
The two girls, like
Hmm.
Karl Marx's daughter
Yeah,
and Sony, have both reacted very differently to similar fathers.
absolutely.
Rebecca is rejecting whatever her father stood for, maybe, that's my
Yeah,
reading.
yeah.
And Eleanor embraced it. So you have both reacting in a different way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one who had probably no contact with the father except that letter, and the other who only had, like, like the most amount of his time, because that was when he was at his creative best. And when she was young and growing up, so she saw him bloom at which no other daughter could, because at the other time he was essentially struggling to keep ends running in his house. The next bit, Nipi?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So this is actually, I thought that apart from the since the country is going through something which is almost which nobody in the world had an idea about, but particularly what our country is going through and how we are managing to do things. I thought it would be very interesting to do something topical, and actually, even in Karl Marx and Kalba Devi, somewhere the masterstroke by the writer Uttam Gada, who's no more, was to bring a connection between Karl Marx and Gandhi, which would be kind of unthinkable for the Western brain, but he managed to do it, and that has kind of brought me a lot. I mean, of course, we all grew up being told to worship Gandhi, and a part of our growing up is also that you are going to break through all that that reverence and this kind of hagiography, and you are going to question things, and you are going to find faults, and you are going to find all kinds of things. But somewhere all through this CA, NRC, the chaos that was happening before the pandemic started, somewhere I thought Gandhi is still is for some unknowable reason manages to touch a nerve, at least for me personally, when for for the kind of idealism he stood for, or for his efforts, or for however, in spite of his failures, and in spite of his feet having full of clay, made of clay, I think that he's somebody who's very important if we want to retain a certain idea of India which is being challenged. So I was kind of working on one project which is more like my own thing ever since the pandemic started, the lockdown, where I got into this idea of making fictional uh, diaries of Mr. M.K. Gandhi, or like assuming if M.K. Gandhi was on social media in 2020, how would he use Twitter? How would he use Instagram? How would he use YouTube? And somewhere in that, I thought that the basic idea was put him in the center of a world grappling with an unforeseen global pandemic. A man who once famously said that the world has enough for everyone's needs, but not everyone's greeds. So interestingly, I did some research and came up across some things which I'd just like to share. M.K. Gandhi was 48 years old when the Spanish flu hit India. Quarantined and living on a liquid diet in the ashram in Gujarat, just 4 years after his return from South Africa. For Gandhi, clearly, the epidemic was evidence of God's punishment of the rabid colonization of Western powers. But Gandhi's interpretation was vehemently criticized, even by some of his own followers. he wrote to his son, Harilal, about a personal loss. And as you know, Gandhi spoke English with a slightly Irish accent. Uh, this letter, this new letter quote would read something like, "Such news is pouring from everywhere, so that the mind is now badly affected. All interest in living has ceased." He later wrote in his autobiography, "All interest in the living has ceased, all because of the Spanish flu." In stark contrast, he felt happy as a bird when in jail later. Jailed 11 times in his life, he sent such charming notes for the children in the ashram. Again, I would assume the notes would be read in an Irish accent, that if you learn to fly without wings, all your troubles will vanish. I have no wings, yet I come flying to you every day in thought. Gandhi writing for young kids in the ashram. So my question is, who is the real MK Gandhi in between these two extremes? The one who lost all interest in life during his Spanish flu quarantine, or the one who felt free as a bird with so many of his prison sentences? So will the real Gandhi stand up and rise to the present day moment in 2020? Will he see the entire world as one global prison? You know, the idea of everybody just being stuck inside their homes, the entire world as one global prison, which is in serious need of reform. How would Gandhi respond to the present day conspiracy theories, the influx of fake news, the perverted and communal hate mongering and fear mongering? His fictional diaries would be my humble attempt to explore the most basic, most humane questions that would bother him as much as they bother us. So this world is my prison, and I thought that I would kind of start doing this because as we all thought, the lockdown would be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, but clearly now we have a couple of years at least to kind of have this love-hate relationship with the outside, which is again, I think, very fascinating. I directed a play called Loitering some years ago, which was inspired from a book called Why Loiter? And it looked at public spaces. It was produced by the NCPA. I hope some of you in the audience would have had the chance to catch it. And it would ask the question as to who owns the city, you know, and the public places of the city, and what is it about your gender, your class, your caste, your appearance, with which you get access to, you know, occupy space in public places in a city. And now all of that has gone for a toss, of course, with the pandemic, but which is why I think this idea of Gandhi seeing it as a prison, seeing his time in the prison and seeing his time in quarantine would be very exciting. While my camera was off earlier, I was hearing when somebody said that when are we having the Bhuj trip again, you know, within this. So my thing is that like how I've been telling myself is that I am really waiting for the day when, you know, this outbreak is over and then they say that it is all right to go out and hug a stranger, to sit at a tea stall and, you know, sit, not worry about what surface are you touching, or you know, who are you shaking hands with, or anything, so to speak. So for us to be alive and kicking for that time when this outbreak is over, right now is the hibernation, where we all need to ensure that, you know, none of us are in a position not to enjoy that as much as we would like to. So that has been essentially one of the things behind getting more and more obsessively working on Gandhi. And one of the things that we are also doing recently is we are doing a fundraiser for musicians in Gujarat who are displaced because of Navratri being cancelled, and all the brass band players and people who do bhajan mandalis and, you know, small really local performers who would otherwise earn in 9 days or 10 days whatever that could keep them running for the whole year. But this time, unfortunately, if you look at the research, the number of suicides in the musician community has gone up, because as a government we tell them that you stay at home, don't work, but hunger and need and necessity and medicines are very real thing. So in that sense, what we are trying to do is we are trying to raise funds through a song and a campaign, crowd-funded campaign, which is going to sustain them for 3 months, which is starting from November to December, January, February, so that and it's so small, like a monthly amount of 1,400 rupees is actually enough for a family on an average of 3. And it must be shocking, these numbers, for people like us, and more so that it's and we all know the amount of money the billionaires have gone up by because of the pandemic. So it's sometimes, the math is so simple that you could just a little bit of thoughtfulness and a little bit of effort can really help balance things out. So then my research took me to another very interesting article which said that faced with today's crisis, what would Gandhi do? So this article is by Abhay Bang, and I'll just quickly go through the main points of the article, because I think my last bit is to do with the last point. That the current global crisis is multi-layered. The COVID-19 pandemic, economic recession, and climate crisis are compounded by the lack of political and moral leadership. What would Mahatma Gandhi do had he been faced with this crisis? This thought experiment yielded a 9-point action program. 1, far deadlier than the virus is the fear of pandemic. Is the pandemic of fear that has paralyzed the world. Gandhi would have asked us to first shed this fear, as he asked the Indians to shed the fear of the British. Like I had read somewhere else that one of the greatest thing Gandhi did was that this middle class fear of being put into jail, he removed that from a large majority of Indians. So there was and I think that a time like that is much needed, where if you're really as Sambhaji Bhagat said recently, that we have to find a way of protesting where you can't even be beaten up by the right wingers nor be arrested by the state mechanism. So, and I think this pandemic and this online kind of interaction is a very, very good start to that. 2, caring for the sick was his natural instinct. People with COVID-19 need physical care and nursing. Gandhi would have nursed them. He would be fastidious about hygiene and mask usage. Gandhi's emphasis on healthy lifestyle, empowerment of self-care, and care in the community would have made perfect sense. And of course, this article was written before the migrant crisis, but I would know that had this been written, then Gandhi would definitely be walking the migrants home. 3, Gandhi would give us his famous talisman to guide us to our duty towards the most helpless and wretched human being that you ever saw. Very interesting, in quotes, to our duty towards the most helpless and wretched human being that you ever saw. The displaced urban migrant workers, hungry and humiliated, would unquestionably be his talisman. Gandhi would rush to them. He would help preserve their dignity and hope, and join the walking hands of migrants as a symbol of unity and protest against the government's apathy and irresponsibility. This would be his new Dandi March. 4, communal activity was the last but incomplete cause of Gandhi's life. When the virus had arrived, some leaders were busy stroking communal hatred. Uniting against communal divisions would be Gandhi's foremost cause, even risking assassination. And we know that he risked it all and paid for it too. We would try to unite people of all religions. He would try to unite people of all religions and castes and send them as volunteers to serve in each other's areas. I think I wish people in politics would take these kind of letters more seriously than a theater maker like me. 5, the fear of infection and strict lockdown has forced people to shut their doors and shun social contact. Gandhi would question, how can there be neighborhood and community without contact? He would have definitely fought the word social distancing and changed it to physical distancing, because social strengthening in spite of the physical distancing is the idea. I suspect Gandhi would go on to the extent of launching a satyagraha by challenging the ghettos created by the lockdown. When the wheel is suddenly removed, one sees clearly the depth of alienation and the pandemic the fear has brought us to. It has made everybody an untouchable. 6. Faced with COVID-19, the global and national leadership have committed blunders and changed the goalposts. No one knows it better than everyone here. Armed with little knowledge about it, judgment errors are natural. But where is the honest admission of failure? Gandhi would admit to his errors. And surprisingly, that would make people trust him even more. 7. In the last 12 years, we have seen that a globalized economy crumbles in the face of faraway tremors such as the financial crisis in the United States or the emergence of a new virus. Gandhi would have reminded us of the stability of local production and local consumption, Gram Swaraj. And it's happening at all levels. People are directly making connections with farmers markets and with transportation being at a standstill, the principles of Gandhian economics are coming back. 8. Consumers will ask, what about our needs? Gandhi would explain that this unlimited desire to consume is not a need. If we limit our greed, we can happily live without several excesses of modern society. And 9. Gandhi's final piece of advice, which is not my favorite advice as Karl Marx myself, but it's still the most important advice, would be for us to pray. To pray at the end of each day, sit quietly, reflect and submit yourself to God, to life, to nature, to truth, to history. You have done all you could have. Now do not continue to carry the burden on your back. Realize the limits of your efforts in this infinite cosmos. Submit and say, thy will be done, inshallah, He Ram. We should not be waiting for Gandhi. I find this the most compelling last 2 lines of the article, that we should not be waiting for Gandhi. We should be acting on what he would have done. And thank you. I think with this, we have crossed time, but yeah, we could be ready to take any responses, questions, discussion.
You were going to sing a prayer, you said?
I could, but it's in Gujarati. Would that?
Everybody will love it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a rare thing that Karl Marx gets to sing a bhajan, but I'll do it. Yes. So the song that we are using for this is the Gandhian. How Gandhi would have used his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, in times of the pandemic to connect people. Virus karne to तेने कहिए जे भीड़ बधानी टाळे रे वायरस कण तो तेने कहिए जे भीड़ बधानी टाळे रे पर सुखे आखू जग बस घर में रहे तोय आखू जग बस घर में रहे तोय एक बनी बीमारी टाळे रे वायरस कण तो तेने कहिए जे वायरस कण तो तेने कहिए. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was absolutely beautiful.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before I open it out for questions to everybody, I just wanted to say I forgot in my introduction. I forgot to say that he was a great singer, but as you all know, he is. And I also forgot to mention that he's joining us from Bangalore, by the way. He's been there for a while now. Yeah, and as you said, the devil is having a good time laughing at us from a distance. What we are doing in the world today, the division, the bigotry, and the sexism that we are facing everywhere. And we really need to stand on Gandhi's principles of need and not greed. But Sachin, saying thank you to you, I just want to say this was so moving and thought-provoking. But on a positive note, there is hope for us if the next generation has thinkers like you. And I say next generation, Sachin, because you are annoyingly young. People don't realize it under all that hair.
I'm only 201 years old, I say. But
ladies, you can unmute yourself and ask him questions. If someone has asked, where can we see loitering?
Yeah, so loitering, incidentally, we did around 9 shows when we opened it, and it was in a lot in Bombay, some in Pune, one in Aligarh, one in Bareilly, and then of course there were some other things I was working on. But now actually I'm really thinking of reviving it in a digital space, because it had a cast of around 10 to 12 people, and it was personal stories in public spaces. So now when these personal stories in public space about public spaces come back into their personal space, it gets an added layer of, you know, of a housewife remembering when she got lost in a while buying vegetables in Villeparle, and that was the only time she knew the market. Or, you know, a disabled person figuring out how he would walk in his college and not be conscious about it. Or there are many very fascinating stories, but hopefully before end of 2020 or 2021, we should be doing something like a online version. And the most interesting part is it's going to be like an intimate experience like this, where at the end of every performance, we would also want the people in the audience to speak about their claim on public spaces, and really curate those kind of stories and keep adding, because we have to really find a way of claiming these spaces back into our digital worlds, so to speak.
Yeah, because also public space is in a way so male dominated. As there was something I was reading, they did a survey. They were asking women, what would you do if for 24 hours there were no men? And most of the women said they would go for a walk late in the night. I mean, how sad is this whole thing?
Yeah, it's like, you know, when the most basic, and the men are not realizing that, you know, these privileges, they are taking them for granted. But it's only when you really look at, like, as a civilized society, what if these public spaces are for the public? They are, the very fact that they are not private spaces means that everybody should have a right to occupy them. And the history of the squatting movement or the Occupy movement had kind of started with this claim. And I think what happened in Shaheen Bagh also was exceptional. And with you know, how the politicians get so scared with just a bunch of women sitting.
Yes.
You know, I found it fascinating. Like they are not, and they are just saying, you come and have a conversation with us, we would like to talk. And I thought that was the biggest learning and strength, that I only have hope from the women of this country. And of course the younger men hopefully would be not as influenced and succumbing to patriarchy as the older ones. But yeah, cheers to a good future on that.
Yes. Lata is asking, how will we know when they go digital with loitering? I will put it up on in this or whatever. Sachin will tell me.
Yeah. I'm very shy and reticent about these things, but Deepika is my mentor, and I really admire her for that, because, you know, it's she will always say that right from stage, that Sachin, TV nahi karta na, you have to learn how to steal the light. You know, and I'll be like, yeah. So I've been learning a lot of things from her, and hopefully the news about loitering will reach her and you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Have you thought of putting this together as a book, the letters? It's brilliant. Wow. I loved the ideas and your letters from Gandhi, and it's really should be put in as a book. Have you thought about that?
I didn't think about it so far, but I would confess that I have been kind of obsessed with letters being read out in communities, you know, and that because like I was actually working on a documentary theater piece which became a little too ambitious because it involved some celebrities. I was doing a piece with Mahesh Bhatt and 6 letters he has written to Pooja Bhatt, with those letters being read on stage by the father and daughter. and some compelling stuff again. And then my research took me to Tagore's letter to his granddaughter, and there is of course Nehru's letter to Indira. So there is a great legacy of parents writing to their sons or daughters. So I mean, yeah, inshallah, if not a book, yeah, sure. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, something to work towards, Sachit.
Yeah. Yes.
Someone else is asking, when can we see Karl Marx next? Now, God knows.
Well, there is do
you have it shot online or anything? Like a video?
Yeah, we do. But as you know, the show keeps changing. But what's happening is, I think on 25th of October, the producer of that play, he's putting it on for just 24 hours or something. There's a festival, and out of which he's doing 4 or 5 of his plays where the YouTube link will be live for an hour for 24 hours. I wouldn't say it's the same, and I would say if you watch it on YouTube, please do watch it on stage whenever it happens. And I'm very sure it's going to happen, because I've been doing it for around 7 years now. And it works in bigger places. It works very well in smaller places. All it needs is a table and a few chairs and books that I bring and my props. It's super interactive. I always keep saying, when a lot of my friends who have missed it, unlike Dipi, who's very sweetly seen it twice, I always say that you can catch it any day. I'll keep doing that show till I'm able-bodied and alive. And it's one of those roles where you don't get too old for it, because everybody knows Marx as a 70-year-old man. So I hope I have a lot of shows left to do. And I'm dying to perform that one in person, because that's what doing that show helped me kind of interact and bring about an ease with different human beings over the years. And I miss that about the lockdown.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sachit. That was absolutely fantastic. If anybody has a quick question, we can...
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Sachit, why does everything when you people speak sound so intellectual? I get so enamored by the whole thing, but these are the basic questions which this pandemic is bringing in front of us. The other day, my husband and myself, we had gone somewhere and we stopped for a cup of coffee. And Deepika and such, I can't tell you what a treat it was to share a cup of coffee or to be allowed to step out in open. It is just, it's the same thing, whether you stay in a big thing or, but definitely most of us are turning introspective in many ways in our lives, because suddenly you find which you thought was less, you possess less clothes, or you possess less of this, you went up less. Today, everything is just getting to you that, why do I need so much? Let's just get rid of it.
Yeah.
And subconsciously or consciously, many people think about it and put it away, but many people say no. I mean, it's a fact that you really don't need so much, and most of the people are taking on to something that is more satisfying to their inner being than being so outwards. I mean, that is what I think. And suddenly there's a beauty. You started looking at the plants with another eye, and you say, wow, look at the nature celebrating. These little things everybody is going through. And this is my second time I'm saying this to somebody else. Can we put it simple? But it was beautiful. What you did was really, really, it was amazing. Thank you, Deepika, from bringing it.
Thank you. For simplicity, I would like to quote another fellow poet who I am a big fan of, Nida Fazli, who wrote some beautiful lines just reflecting what you just said, that मैं रोया परदेस में भीगा माँ का प्यार, मैं रोया परदेस में भीगा माँ का प्यार, दुख ने दुख से बात की बिन चिट्ठी बिन तार, छोटा करके देखिए जीवन का विस्तार, छोटा करके देखिए जीवन का विस्तार, आंखों भर आकाश है बाहों भर संसार.
Wow. Who's the writer?
This is Nida Fazli.
Excellent.
How beautiful.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sir, that poem that you
Thank
just
you.
said, is there a way you could translate that to English? Because I didn't understand anything you said.
Sure. It just said that I cry, I weep in a faraway land, in Pardes, in a land which is not my own, in a faraway country, and my mother also cries with that thought. Bhiga maa ka pyar. Like I cry here, but her love is also kind of melting, and dukh ne dukh se baat ki bin chitti bin tar. That pain spoke to pain without any email or without any letter or without any telegram. And chota karke dekhiye जीवन का विस्तार. That as much as possible try and reduce and minimalize your definition of life. बाहों भर आंखों भर आकाश है बाहों भर संसार. After all, when you minimalize it, you will realize that the sky that you see is only as much as your eyes can see, and the sansar, the world that you can see, is only the ones that you can hug. So it's really minimum. The eyes only see this much sky, and you can only hug these many people. So make it minimal.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Just lovely.
So,
Thank you.
Sachin, there's just one, I promised myself when lockdown started that I would read more of the Indian classical literature. And I came across, of course, I've seen the series, but I came across Ghare Bhairi again.
Oh,
And
Satyajit Ray.
when lockdown opened and all the stages of lockdown and we're still sitting at home, Ghare Bhairi is the term that keeps resonating in my mind.
Absolutely.
Someone is saying that you are very philosophical for your age, Sachit.
No, when I was young, my mother would, she's a bit of a believer. So anybody who had a background in astrology, she would be like, "Oh, please tell him what is his future," and one of there were contrasting opinions. One bunch of astrologers said that he'll be a philosopher, and the other said that he'll be a judge, he'll be a supreme. So I've become a judgmental philosopher, I guess, a bit of both.
To keep your mother happy.
Excellent. So on that happy note, thank you so much, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepika, for a
Thank you.
wonderful.
Both of you. And a very big hand for him, please.
Thank you.
Beautiful meeting.
Beautiful meeting.
Can I sing 2 lines for Dipi? Can I sing?
Yes, please.
Because one of my most cherished theater trips has been to Pakistan, Lahore, and Dipi was with us.
We performed a play, Girish Karnad's play, Wedding Album. This was like how many years ago, Sachit? 8 years ago?
Yeah, 2009 or something. Yeah.
Before drama started, we were still friends with that country. And it's the International Theatre Festival, so there were plays from all over the world, and our play was one of them. So go ahead, Sachit.
And apart from the joy of giving a beer hug to Abida Parveen, one of the songs that which I called "Brother from My Pakistani Mother." So I would just one of the antras which is not in the video, and since Dipi likes it, so I'll sing the antara which is not in the video. So it'll be new for her. The song is self-explanatory as it means, "Brother from My Pakistani Mother." नक्शे वक्शे धूल हो गए, यार बन गए लाखों, वीजा शीजा खेल न खेलू, चांद के पीछे भागू, इश्क ही काशी, इश्क कराची, इश्क पेशावर पूना, दिल का टुकड़ा पास में है फिर, दिल क्यों इतना सूना, इश्क लाहौरी, इश्क इंदौरी, इश्क न देखे वागे, इश्क की चिड़िया सरहद पर, इश्क का अंबर ताके, इश्क की चिड़िया सरहदों पर इश्क का अंबर ताके बोले मस्त हुआ बर्बाद हुआ इश्क का कलमा याद हुआ फैज हुआ नौशाद हुआ पिंजरे का पंछी आजाद हुआ Thank you.
Beautiful.
Who wrote this?
This is a video. Just quick. I'm sorry I didn't mention it again. I've been very bad in this meeting. Just quickly tell everybody about that video and where they can see it, Sach.
Sure. Yeah. So this video is actually a kind of a notorious project that we did. There's a singer in Pakistan called Asrar who has a song called Mast Hua Barbad Hua, which is a very different song. It's like a pop Sufi song. But strangely, he looks a lot like me. So a lot of my friends in India and abroad were like, hey, you made a song, you never told us. And I found it kind of fascinating that there is a doppelganger of mine, with the same kind of hair. So what I did is along with Varun Grover, who a lot of people would know is a very famous stand-up comic and writer. So we wrote newer lyrics and we made our own version of the song, which is a cover of the song, which is about India-Pakistan love or friendship, so to speak. And we split the screen into two halves. So half of the screen is him, half is me. And, you kind of confuse how are they singing together when they've not even met. And so it's a kind of solidarity activism project. And you can find it on YouTube on TVF Timeliners. You can just say Satchit Asrar, or I think it should be not difficult. That's about it.
Lovely.
Okay, so now I really think we have to call it.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Sachit. Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Great morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deepika.
Hoping to see you all in person when all of this is over.
Thank you.